Good afternoon and welcome to Leadership Impact. My name is Matthew Devine. Today, I would like to talk to you about your influence as a leader. Specifically, I'm going to explore 4 aspects that are critical to develop if you want to build your influence. What do I mean when I say influence? Influence represents your ability to communicate ideas effectively to other people, to convince them of your perspective, and to inspire them to get into action. Now, as a leader, you already benefit from having some built-in influence simply because you hold a manager-level job title. Your authority is supported by the organization, meaning you can tell people what to do and people will do those things. But authority is not the same as influence. People might do a task because you order them to do it. But if they don't believe in your ability as a leader, if they don't trust you, then you will not be able to inspire them to solve problems, to be creative and suggest new ideas, or even to keep focused on doing the work when things become difficult. For that matter, your ability to get projects or budgets approved, or to negotiate better work assignments for your team, and solve complex multi-department issues that span different groups depend on your ability to influence both your peer-level managers and the leaders above you who are making those decisions. So why am I qualified to talk about influence? First off, I have worked for 18 years in management roles in human resources, specifically in talent management, which means I've been dealing much more directly with people and managers, as well as the change management function. These roles have put me in a unique position to both learn how to have influence in my own career, but also importantly, observe how other managers and leaders have attempted to influence the course of the business, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. Now, during this time, I worked with literally hundreds of managers and high potential leadership candidates in the organizations that I've worked for. So I've seen a lot of people doing this and trying to do this. Furthermore, I've worked on a lot of projects as well, some small tech implementations of a few $1 million, up to being one of the business leads of a $500 million global transformation project. And this experience, or these experiences, have allowed me to see how building one's influence across other business leads and critically the operational leads can help a project succeed or not succeed. Currently, I am executive coach. I work one-on-one with senior leaders and the CEOs of tech startups and help them develop their vision of the future and how they can have greater influence in the work that they do. So I'm actively doing this on a one-on-one basis. All of this has helped me understand 4 aspects that are critical to have influence and to develop your influence further. These 4 aspects are: 1, how do you look? 2, what do you say? 3, what do you believe? And 4, what is your vision for the future? So how do you look? What do you say? What do you believe? And your vision for the future. So let's look at each of these in turn. First, how do you look? Now, this is how you physically show up to the world. Now, full disclosure, I am not a fashion coach, and this is not about talking about what suit to buy or what shoes you should be wearing. That's, there are people who do that work, and that's not what this is about. What this is about is understanding what is going to be important to have the influence that you want. And it can be summed up simply by the expression, dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. If you're showing up as you currently are and expecting that is going to allow you to have influence with the audience you want, you need to be thinking about whether these things match or not. Now, to be clear, this does not automatically mean buying a power suit if you want to have greater influence. Now, let me give you an example of when that actually worked against me. So years ago, earlier in my career, I was applying for a HR consultant job at Home Depot. And the way they had set up their human resources department is it was a distributed system. So there was HR representatives at different physical locations. So I went in, did the initial interview, did well. Got moved into the second interview. So this was with the regional HR director. Great, had a great interview with that person. I then went on and had an interview. This was the final interview with the local store manager and one of their operational leads. And I showed up as I had with all the other interviews. I dressed up in a nice suit, a nice tie. I was looking great. The manager of the store walked in coveralls, work boots. He was covered in sawdust. And we sat down in the break room of the Home Depot to conduct this interview. And here I am showing up as almost like a corporate head office guy in very much an environment that was trades focused and handy, how do you do it kind of environment. There was a big disconnect when it came to the culture. And despite having done very well in all the interviews up to that point, I didn't move any further than that. And it was because I did not take into consideration who my audience was and dressing appropriately. I'm sure if I just wore a nice shirt and maybe a tie, it might have worked, but full-on suit, too much. So you need to be considering how you are showing up to the audience you want to talk to. What is going to connect with them and what is not going to connect with them? In a corporate environment, this often means dressing up in a suit, but it doesn't have to depending on the environment you're in. Now, it's also important to consider how you show up in other spaces as well. For instance, your profile on LinkedIn is a way in which you physically show up to the world. It may be in a digital way, but it's a way that people perceive you. Now, you may not be active on LinkedIn, and that's fine. I'm not here to tell you how much you need to be on a social media platform. Do what you need to do. But your profile is doing the work to present you to the world. Your colleagues will be able to see you online, prospective employees, people who may be considering joining the company and looking at you as being a possible boss in the future. Recruiters, other leaders in the space, in your industry, are all going to be encountering your profile or looking up your profile. And how you show up will communicate key pieces of information about how serious you are about the work that you do. So if your profile is outdated, incomplete, missing some aspects that are really important to share about what you stand for and what do you believe, then you may not be having the influence you want. You may be actually actively undermining your influence, and you may not even realize it. So it's important to consider not only how you physically show up, in a meeting, on a Zoom call, but also how you're showing up in a digital space. The challenge with having the influence is a lot of people will focus on just how they look. And they think, if I can just wear the right tie, if I'm making sure that I wear a nice watch, then that's enough. It isn't. If focusing on your physical appearance will only present you as being shallow if you're not looking at all the other dimensions as well, the other aspects of having influence. Put another way, if we took the suit away, if we took the nice shoes away, what do you have left? All right, let's move on to the second one. What do you say? So this is the words that you use. These would be what you write about. These are the things you communicate to the world. I've worked with a lot of engineers. I've spent a lot of time working in utilities, so I've worked with a lot of engineers in my career. And with many of them, there is a great emphasis on stating actual facts and engineering standards. And all this is really critical information. It's really important. You want to make sure that the buildings stay up and that people are safe. And that requires very clear communicating of the numbers and the figures and the facts and the standards. Perfect, great. We need that. But simply stating a fact may not be enough to actually have the influence you need. So you need to have the facts. You need to have the critical data. That's important. We're not removing that. But it's not enough. Your message needs to not only communicate these valuable facts, you also need to communicate emotion to have influence. For example, stories are a great way to communicate emotion. Describing how the people a project might affect, how they're going to feel about a situation, what's going to show up in their lives when a project gets influenced, will help communicate the emotion that they will be feeling. And when you use emotional words in your speech, in your writing, you start to trigger those emotions in your audience as well. So it's important to include the facts, but also think about the emotion. How are people going to feel when this thing gets implemented? Also take a look at, what do people value? What do they stand for? What's important to them? If we're making sure that we understand that there are certain critical aspects that may not have any, physical relevance, but it's just important to them. If we understand that and we're calling attention to those, that's going to help people feel like they are heard and understood. And it means that your message is going to have a greater impact. This requires you to be actively listening to what people say to you, to understand what is important to them. What do they value? What do they feel about this? You need to be hearing that. You need to be paying attention to what they say. So going into conversations and not just simply projecting your message to them, not just simply throwing your words and your facts at them, but also taking the time to listen to them, to listen to understand them, making sure that you're communicating back to them the words that they are using, so that they understand that they feel like you are actually hearing them. Here's one way that this can show up. So consider how you might introduce yourself at a networking event. Many people will go into one of these events and they will say, okay, my name is Matthew Devine and I am a manager of X, Y, and Z. And they will stop there, assuming that the other person will just naturally understand that the job title communicates a certain value, communicates a certain authority, and communicates a certain thing. But that may not necessarily be true. Sure, we know what the word engineer means. We know what the word doctor means. We know what the word manager means. And we have a sense of, a director may be higher than a manager and a VP is higher than a director. Like we know that. We understand basic organizational structure. But if we're relying on that organizational to communicate the value that we bring, the things that are special about us, are, what we can contribute, then we're not having enough influence. So think about when you're at one of these networking events, not only obviously your job title, but what value do you bring? What's the difference that you make in your employees' lives or in the organization? Like, what is the impact that you or your team is having, and how do you help drive that forward? You may not be able to, from that be able to influence the whole organization, but you may be able to articulate what you can do in your group and what you can do in your department. And this feeds nicely into my third point, which is, what do you believe? Your beliefs are critical to understand. If you believe you can do something, if you believe you can't do something, that will heavily affect your ability to actually do that thing, whatever that happens to be. So if you don't believe it's possible, no one else is going to believe you either. And people are really good at seeing conviction and believing whether or not that other person believes it themselves. If you're listening to something and it doesn't sound like they believe it, you're not going to take it seriously either. Now, this is important to pay attention to, because if you don't believe it, then there is some other mindset that you need to look at. Maybe there's doubt going on in your headspace around whatever the topic is. It's important to take a look at that and say, well, what is it exactly that I'm thinking here? And so I'd recommend start paying attention to that narrative, those voices that are basically in your own head, or your own, dialogue that you talk about yourself. If you're using words like, this will never work, or it'll always be this way, or maybe, I'm not good enough to be on this stage, or people think my ideas are pretty dumb. Pay attention to those words that you're using, because they're forming your belief system around what's possible, what can be done and what can't be done. Now, it's going to be a challenge to convince other people if you don't believe it yourself. So I recommend you start with paying attention to those voices and start challenging those assumptions that you're making about whether or not you can do something, whether or not you deserve to be on that stage, whether or not people will actually like your ideas or not. Challenge those. Actually question them. Is that true? Do you have evidence that these beliefs have truth to them? Or is it just your own fear? Your fear of rejection, fear of things not working out. So start with challenging your assumptions, because I argue these are just your beliefs, not the truth. Now, if you're all having challenges with this, I recommend seeking out the support of a coach or a mentor. Having that outside perspective from somebody who is there to support you is a good way to get a broader perspective to help you articulate what these beliefs are and whether or not they're actually holding you back. Because when you believe the ideas, when you believe something is possible, that's when other people are going to believe you too. And when other people can believe you, then you're having influence, and your words are going to have greater influence, and your vision for the future is going to have a greater impact. Finally, moving on to the fourth aspect, your vision for the future. There's a line in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland that I absolutely love. So Alice, our heroine, is has gone into this mystical land, fantastical land, and she's trying to find her way home. And she encounters the Cheshire Cat and asks, which way should she go? The Cheshire Cat responds, if you don't know where you want to go, then it doesn't matter which path you take. And the truth when it comes to having influence in an organization, if you don't have a vision for the future, where you want to go, then it doesn't matter what you do. If you're actually wanting to have impact, you have to have an idea of where you're going to go, or at least a direction. Well, it's important to know where you are, and you can determine this through, various business metrics, your financial and operational performance and statistics. You need to be able to articulate a vision for the future in order to actually move the needle, get moving in the right direction as you see it. So you need to articulate this vision for the future. And it's about helping people see what the business will be like, what the organization will be like. What will people be doing? What are good things that are possible in this future? What are the positives if you can realize this vision? And what bad things will you be able to avoid in that future? You need to be able to talk about these things and help people say, all right, here are the things that are important for us to achieve. And, we can get on board with that. We like that vision. We think that's a great place to be. You need to be able to, paint that picture for people. In addition, people need to see how they fit into that vision of the future. It's more than just simply saying, oh yeah, the business is going to be great. What will they be doing specifically? They need to believe that they have a part in that future, that they belong in that future, and that they're going to be a valuable aspect, and both critical in helping achieve that future, but they're going to be living in that future. So you need to be thinking about not only what does that future look like, but what does it look like for them, for your employees, for your colleagues, for your clients and customers. Sure, you can back up this vision with data and metrics and evidence. Yeah, do all that. It's important to have all the facts, getting back to my engineers earlier on. Yes, you need to have as much data as possible to fill in the details. But data alone is insufficient. Your vision needs to inspire people. It needs to make people curious. It makes them want to turn their head and say, this person has an idea. And not only they've got a good idea, but I want that vision too. I want that future too. And I'm going to contribute my own ideas. I'm going to, work in my own way to make sure that vision happens because I believe that vision. And maybe, you may not be able to articulate all the various things that a whole department or an organization needs to do in order to realize that vision. But if you communicate it in a way that people can see, then they will interpret that in the work that they do to help realize that vision. So how do you do this? So, often, there's talk about goal setting in an organization, and we're going to set this goal, this target to strive toward. And these are tangible, measurable targets that you can work toward. And these are important. You need to have these goals in order to get the work done. But don't confuse goal setting or goals with a vision. A vision does not necessarily have an end state. Goals have end states. Goals are like, there's a finish line, we're trying to get to this. A vision doesn't necessarily have an end state. In fact, some of the most inspiring visions are purely aspirational. The trick is imagining a future that currently doesn't exist. And this is where people run into trouble. They can't articulate something that doesn't exist because you're going into the unknown. No one knows what that looks like. So you need to be able to try to paint a picture of what that could possibly look like. So how do you do that? Start with your core values. What is something you stand for? What is something you believe? Now, imagine if you were to apply that belief to what the company is doing. What would they be doing differently in that future if the organization held to that same belief? What would your employees be doing differently if they all bought into that belief? How would people perceive your product if they understood that was your belief? The answers to these questions will start to form the framework for this vision of the future, because you're now starting to say, all right, here's this vision and it's supported by values. And here's how the organization will look. And here's what work you'll be doing. Here's what the people will feel when they see the work that we're creating based on this value. Now, you can do the same exercise using the values of the organization, assuming the organization has some well-articulated values. You can also do this exercise thinking about the values your customers have or the people you're trying to serve have. Think about what does the future, what does the product, what does your employee look like if it's focused on the values of your clients. This is a starting place. And from there, you can start to build in the stories that support this. You can start layering in evidence that shows here's how it's possible. Here's what we can do when we have the right infrastructure. Then you can start fleshing out this vision for the future. Now, there's more to say for each of these 4 areas, but I wanted to start today by giving you this overview of these 4 aspects that you need to consider when you want to have influence and you want to build your own influence. So in summary, number 1, how do you look? How do you physically show up? But also consider, how do you show up in other spaces as well, like online? 2, what do you say? How do you communicate? And what are the words that are going to be resonating with your audience? 3, what do you believe? And what are the words that you use about yourself? What are there any roadblocks getting in your way, mindsets that are preventing you from believing a future, believing the words that you're actually saying? And for what is your vision for the future? Being able to articulate a vision allows you to have influence because you're now shaping the destiny of the organization and the people who you serve. So does that resonate with any of you? Let me know. And stay tuned for future episodes when I start to get into each of these aspects in greater detail. And for those of you who are interested in having further conversations, send me a message, send me a direct message, and happy to get on a call. We can explore what kind of influence do you have in your work and in your organization, and what kind of influence do you want? So until next time, my name is Matthew Devine. I'm an executive coach working in Toronto, Canada, and let's get back to work.